Okay, so did you get to see the first video at least? A review video? I tried to do some close-ups. If you have any critiquing on that, I just assume no, like this wasn't clear, or could you do this more, whatever-ish. I'd appreciate that. Last night's video I meant to send out earlier in the week, but this weekend got crazy with me facilitating a weekend workshop for another artist. So, that second one is just some of the techniques we might work on first thing today. And then it's up to you. I did send out some pictures of some flowers and some ocean scenes, because I gave you mountains before. And feel free to play around with those as you like. If you want more direction, just let me know. I tend to give you, like I said, the tools and techniques so that you can learn those and then play around with them yourselves. And I love that you guys are socializing and mixing it up, and most people are kind of in a different seat except that's back there in the back row. Although Jess is back there today.
I'm happy to switch.
I'm good because I can heckle from the back.
Ah, yes. You can talk about us all up here, man.
I could.
I love it. I love it. Let me double check. So we did lifting, splattering, scratching. Right, we did the slow scratch, so you leave a white, or you can do the deep scratch so you get a darker line into the wet paint.
I never got that. I tried and tried. Is that my brush too wet, or it has to be, the paint has to be wet and my brush is dry, or?
It depends. If you want the dark line, you want the paint to still be quite wet, so that when you make a little indentation in the paper, the paint will settle into that. If you want to scrape paint away, it has to be partially dry, and then you can kind of scrape some of the paint away.
With a wet brush, or?
Oh, that's the lifting, you mean?
Yeah.
That's the lifting. The other thing I was talking about was when I used the beveled edge of this.
I couldn't do either one.
Yeah. For the lifting, you want to clean your brush, make it, dry it off slightly so it's just damp, and that it acts like a sponge and it kind of lifts up. And I also kind of twist it as I go, so I'm getting a clean lift. But as we get going and everybody's painting and I'm coming around, remind me. Okay, thanks. The plastic wrap and the titanium white. I went and bought some titanium white. It's a little pricey, so don't feel you have to get it until you're ready to move on and keep doing things. Okay. Just double checking. Good. So I've got some paper. Tape how to lift. I'm just reviewing my notes to make sure I've covered everything. Did you see the video? And I talked about that. When you do take your tape off, try to be sure your painting is dry. If it's wet, it'll stick and it will rip your paper. It's apt to rip your paper. It won't necessarily, it's not guaranteed, but if it's dry. And then pull the tape off at a 45-degree angle. That helps it release the paper much better. Tints and shades. All right, a couple of things. Value. Value, if you received this printout, at the bottom here, I mean this is kind of in color, but a value scale in black and white will go from white to black. And most people refer to white as 1, and black would be 10. So if I talk, your value's at about a 2 or 3, you're going to be looking in here, as compared to a 7 or 8, it's going to be darker. That also applies to color. With watercolor, it's easy because if you want it lighter, you just add more water. If you want it darker, you add less water. Do try to avoid putting down watercolor paint as solid paint. It looks like an acrylic paint. Can you hold yours up? Sure. See, it looks like an acrylic. I knew as soon as I looked at it that she does acrylic. I mean, it's beautiful.
That's watercolor?
Right,
Oh my
but she
God.
put it on very thick, like acrylic paint, which you can do. If you want it to look like watercolor, you can do it lighter. May I borrow yours? I'm so sorry.
But why do you say try to avoid doing that?
Because it doesn't look like watercolor.
Okay.
So here's a lovely little painting that Krista did. And she was concerned because it wasn't dark enough. But that brown in the background is just beautiful in how it goes around her little flower there. This looks like a watercolor.
Did you use
You
it?
know, Kim's is beautiful too. It's
So you just
beautiful.
painted
It
real
just doesn't look
carefully
like a
on
watercolor.
No, I know, and you knew immediately, I usually work in acrylic, so.
Yeah, she's used to thicker paint. So value is by adding more water, you're gonna make it lighter. In other mediums, you have to add white. In pastel, you have to have a whole value range of one color to make it work. So there's different things. So considering that, what that is good for, basically, besides one object being lighter than another object, is distance, our aerial perspective. So if you have mountains and they're going back in the distance, the items that are closer to you, the hills closer to you, are going to have more contrast. You're going to have a darker dark and a lighter light. And that's what you see right here. So if you had a white house and a black car beside it, that would be very distinctive up close. But if you were 10 miles away from that and that was way up on a mountain somewhere, those two extreme values of black and white would kind of come closer together. You would reduce the contrast between those. And the reason for that is, as we talked about, is the aerial perspective. Aerial just referring to air, but you spell it A-E-R, aerial. And that's because there's more moisture and atmosphere between us and the things in the distance, and that will bring it down. If you're working with color, you can also add a little blue in that because of the way the light reflects through the atmosphere. So that's how value works. Another little thing we want to think about, maybe not as you're doing exercises, don't worry about this, but when you go to compose a painting, you want to think about your layout of composition. Now you can get very complex with this. You can start with a Fibonacci series, which is, if anybody's familiar with that, it's the same design, but it gets smaller and smaller. It's very prevalent in nature. Or the golden mean is a Greek division of space. But we're going to simplify it down to just the rule of thirds. And I keep stepping on that. The rule of thirds, this is writing and talking at the same time, I'm so sorry, is if you have a piece of paper, you generally want to divide it kind of into thirds. So that if you're doing a flower, like this peony, your flower is not going to be smack dab in the middle of your painting. But it just kind of deadens the interest of it. You want to compose it a little bit more. So by dividing up any paper into thirds, regardless of its orientation or format, whether it's long, skinny, square, at the division of any two of those third lines where they intersect, choose one of those as your main focus. That's where my star is. And maybe another one as your secondary focus. So it's kind of balancing out. You can do it here or here, you can move it around. But that's just a very general rule of thirds that will help your compositions look more interesting. So in order to do this peony, I would probably, you know, crop the picture somehow and move it around so it worked better. Good. You all seem to understand. Everybody's yes, yes. Good. See?
I shake my head a lot.
Yeah.
Do look at masters. Go on and look for master watercolors. I usually put in like watercolors, masters, and you'll get, people will tag their own stuff as masters and you get some of these cheesy ones. But look for people, and I should send out a list. Maybe I'll write that down.
That's pretty bold, tagging yourself as a master.
Yeah.
Well, because they know people go on Google and start searching for it, so they want their work to pop up. Master watercolors. Andrew Wyeth, even though he's known for his tempera paints, his watercolors I like even better than his tempera.
There's an
Beautiful.
exhibit at the Asheville Art Museum right now.
Yeah.
They are the three generations.
Yeah. And then Greenville has the Andrew Wyatt Museum, I thought.
Greenville has, that's
Greenville,
right,
South
that's
Carolina.
right. They're very prevalent in Maine. They have a lot of property and stuff up there. Jamie also does great watercolors. Winslow Homer, amazing watercolors. John Singer Sargent, known for portraiture, but his watercolors just
Really?
glow and sing and are just, make you want to melt, you weak in the knees kind of thing.
Doesn't he have, didn't he do portraits in Biltmore? He did a lot of that.
There are, yes,
Yeah.
they did
And
hire
they were
him
oil,
for
right?
portraits. Yep.
Yep.
They did George and his mother.
Yeah.
The one of Edith is not, it looks like a sergeant, but it's not, but they're beautiful. But do some searches and see what they're doing, and then try to figure out how they've done that. You have a lot of the basic techniques already, so you can, try to figure out what they did. Like as I went around, I could tell, where's your, the pastel one? Who had the pastel one?
The watercolor?
Yes, Beth, it was you.
Yeah.
You were over here when I was talking
Yes,
to you.
yes, that's why we're confused.
So Beth pulled this out, she was showing me something she had done previously. And because you get experience, you can start picking out what techniques these people used. So when I look at this, right off the bat, underneath, and I'll bring it around, I could see plastic wrap.
Really?
But she stretched it out and made it like wavy instead of clumpy. And then she did some painting around, and then on top of that, there's a darker area. She put pastel. I said, oh, there's pastel on that. And she went, is there?
And then we touched it.
And then we touched it, and there was pastel all over her hands. But you can see
The
how
purple.
the
or
purple and the green
and
underneath.
the green.
See, it almost looks like water.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So whether you keep the plastic clumpy or you kind of stretch it out like that, you can get different ideas. My mother used to use the plastic wrap for water lilies. I mean, that's what she did. She was a watercolorist exclusively. And she would use that and then shape it so that she got the leaf shape and the little striations of the veins. So now that you're learning, you're educating yourself, so you know how to recognize. So look at the masters and think, how did they do that? Did they spray that with water? Did they use salt? This plastic wrap that Pam has here, I love this stuff. This is my favorite, which is the stuff I've given you around. This will stick to things, but it won't stick to itself. So you know how some plastic.
That's
Oh,
weird.
yes.
They all seem to stick to them.
I know, they are.
Right? It's that plastic wrap I don't like when I have to use it for food, because it won't stick to itself as you're putting it around. It makes me so mad.
No, I think this one does.
That
but
one
this-
does?
I think, yeah. No, have you had?
I've had some that don't stick to themselves at all. And it's
Right,
like,
yeah, it
why
doesn't
would
stick to
I-
anything. So wait,
Why
it's-
would I even?
For me, this stretch tight will stick to things when you want it to and unstick when you don't want it to. So you can say, play around with this. Again, I would get your credit card, make little squares, practice your little techniques if you want, or just, look at you, you're all practicing as you go along. I love this.
Let me get another, because I was busy
Yes.
trying to get that written down. The dot part is what? The star is where you want to put a focal
Right.
thing, event, picture, or flower,
That
whatever.
will be your primary
yeah.
focus.
But what's the
The
dot?
dot is your secondary.
Gotcha,
So in
thank you.
almost every painting, you have a primary and a secondary. If they are equally balanced, the eye's gonna be going back and forth and it's gonna be hard. You want to conduct the viewer's eye around your painting. So another aspect of that is you don't want anything, say if this is your primary focus, you don't want a strong line going right off that corner. If it does, the viewer's eye is gonna go out there and not have any way back in. So you're gonna want something that, like as if this is your primary focus, so it doesn't pull you off, maybe just a very gentle kind of, something very subtle at the edges will bring your eye around. And if you look at masterworks, they do that. They
Okay.
It's almost like you're telling your viewer where to look. All right, any questions? Please, somebody questions so I can breathe.
You can breathe without questions, it's okay.
You can tell I taught high school for 20 years. Like, you gotta keep talking or you lose their interest.
We might have a little bit longer an attention span.
Yeah.
A little.
We're here voluntarily.
That makes a huge difference.
So maybe more silent.
Well, most of my classes, kids would sign up, I taught foreign languages and arts, so it was kind of an elective.
They wanted to be.
All right. Just quick little demos here. Oops, I forgot to do my wash over. Here's some saran wrap. I was kind of going with a peony idea. I just put down some brush strokes, and I'll show you again quickly. And then I put the, why do I call it saran wrap? That must have been what my mother used. Plastic wrap. I still call it tin foil too. Who calls it tin foil?
I do.
Yeah, I do.
Right? It's not.
What is it?
It's aluminum foil. But tin foil's so much quicker to say. Or just foil. There we go. That would save a lot of time. I've also put some of my resist here for this calla lily, yes? Is that what, okay. To paint around that. And with that one, I am just going to, now that it's, this is a trick too. It's not totally dry, but it's getting there. So if you use the back of your finger, that works well. If it's wet, this is pretty dry. It's sticky, but it's not bad. I'm just going to get a big area of paint washing here. Nice brown color. I have no idea why it's going brown. I do actually. I'm just mixing everything together. You can't mix black, right? It comes out this mucky brown. And now because it's dry, I can do a nice quick wash right over it. And so my background is going to be cohesive. It's going to hold together. If I want, I can spray it and then let that dry. So everywhere that this, you can see it resisting even as we go along. I'm going to let that dry and then I'm going to lift that. Then I can go back in and paint in very, very delicate shaded areas in that flower with a very, very light blue. And then finish up with a little detail of the stamen in the middle. Here, I have no idea. It's always kind of experimental. It's good to leave a little more. It's not quite dry. See, it's not dry. Look what happened.
That's kind of cool.
It's just kind of bleeding now. But I did it quickly. Try to leave white in between because then it'd be
And
more
irregular,
sparkly.
for the flower, the concept is make it irregular.
Yes, irregular. And then you don't have to go like, ooh, this petal and that petal and that petal. This, as unnatural as it is, can create some beautiful natural textures. So my recommendation would be try two things like that. Now, if you don't have any resist, and remember I put soap, I have a designated brush with the blue tape. I put some soapy water in here, kind of take the soap off the outside, and then you can dip it in. This one comes with a little brushy thing inside. Oh, and I forgot to share with you, Donna, you mentioned this, that at Cheap Joe's, they have a special tool that you can put it on with. It's kind of a fibrous something. And then they also have pipettes. Pipettes are the little long tubes with a tiny thing. You use them for chemistry class. But you can pick stuff up and you can drop it. What?
Pipettes.
Is it pipettes? I
Yeah.
always call them pipettes.
Pipette.
Pipettes.
Why did I always call them pipettes?
We also use it to make our
I must have had a
our
teacher.
Sharpie silk scarves. We use pipettes
Yeah.
and we dip it and pull up the rubbing alcohol.
Pipettes.
Yeah.
Bum, bum. That's all right. When I first came here and I was teaching, and Pam's like, you say, this is how I naturally say it, drawing. I'm gonna be drawing. And she's like that, and she says drawing. Draw. How do you say it?
Drawing.
Drawing. So I'm just trying to say drawing. I gotta get draw and then I get ing.
My mother used to say Washington.
So thanks to
You gotta
Pam, I have to
watch
stop and think about it.
make fun of people I love, so.
I know,
there
I
you
know.
go.
At least I don't talk too much like a maniac. I can. Now we're gonna do something down at the farm, and we're gonna. I can talk like a Northern Mainer too with the Canadian accent. All right. Why don't you practice some of the techniques that you may be not comfortable with? Do you want me to do some brush strokes again? How did you feel? Tina was asking, she said she got her double-loaded brush. I'm gonna use this one instead. Now I don't know why this one has blue tape on it. I know why this one does. But I picked this up. I think I used to tape my supplies because when I was teaching and my daughters were doing things with me too, I knew which ones were mine. And I'm very generous with a lot of things, but my art supplies, I just bought them their own. I was like, there, go mess around with yours. So if you do a double load, and you get you want your brush fairly wet but not too wet. Double load it in some paint. That means tip one tip into the paint and then turn it over and do the other tip. So I have a double loaded brush here. If the hairs start to separate at this point, it's because your brush is a little too dry. That's what it's indicating. You could either mist it very lightly to add a little more water into it, or just barely touch the tip of the brush back in there so that stops. And then this is the trick. The press and drag, whoops, turn it up on its tip, very light touch, and then press and drag again. See, that was too wet, but I'm also not flat. Somebody talked about painting at an angle. You'll see some watercolorists do that, and there's a very well-known artist. He's not a master, he's still alive. He's recently putting up a lot of his older paintings. I have a feeling he's getting older and just sharing his work, because I have one of his books from way, way back. And he will do that, and he will incorporate those drips into his watercolor painting. His name is Charles Reed. I'll write that down too. You can find him on Facebook. I know not everyone is on Facebook, but also websites and things like that.
You went back to the.
Since if we're doing flowers today, you want to practice your petals. Have a piece of scrap paper near you, and before you go into whatever kind of flower you're doing, say if you're doing the sunflower, do some good practice strokes. Let's see. If you're considering that the center of the sunflower is going to be here, where all the seeds are, you're going to be coming out from that. This is really hard to do upside down. No way for me. So again, a light touch, kind of pull it out because it's thin near the seeds. It gets wide. Press it down, lift it back up, twist it, and lift it like that.
Oh my God.
Ta-da! I'm going to start painting upside down. You can also slightly double load your brush. Let's try a little double load. I put some brown or blue or something in there. Press down and up. So you get shadow already in there, and it bleeds together naturally. So you're not getting layers. Something else I was going to say about that. Now notice I've got a white background. So later on, I'm either going to have to leave that white, which is okay, or I'm going to have to paint my blue around that.
But you couldn't put the yellow and the blue, the green.
If you put the yellow on the blue, do I have any blue? Not right off. It'll turn into green. Because remember, the watercolor paint dries, but there's particles, microscopic particles sitting on top of the paper. So if you wet those again, it's going to lift it. Remember how you can have, these paints have been sitting in here for years. Some of them, and sometimes I'll add more paint into it, but all I have to do is wet them and they're viable again. So that's going to happen on here. Like if I dampen this, it's actually going to pick up some of the paint that's underneath it. Sometimes if you've made a mistake, is this helpful if I just kind of keep chit-chatting?
Yeah.
If you've made a mistake, remember how we did the lifting? Even if it's totally dry, you can, with a damp, not wet, but a damp, clean brush, you want it clean, you can, depending on the color, kind of scrub into that. And what I'm doing is I'm softening the paint right in that area. Now I'll make my brush even drier, and I'm going to, that's what we were talking about. This now is just very, very damp brush. It has some water and it's going to act like a sponge. I'm going to carefully drag that across
Oh,
and lift.
so in a way, you could potentially do your blue sky, go back, wash it off, and do your, in the same stroke pattern as your petals.
If
And then
you-
put your petals down.
Make sure it's dry when you
Yeah.
do that. Depending on what color is in your background. And that's why you do your test things off to the side. A lot of the blues are very strong, it's gonna be hard to lift. And as I said, some of the out of the tube greens are very difficult to leave. Viridian green, that bluish green, tricky to, but
Yeah.
play with it and see if
Yeah.
it works. That's another. There are so many ways of layering and trying these techniques, doing one before the other, putting them one over the other. There's a lot of
When you do that
possibilities.
sunflower, you didn't actually twist it the whole way, you just,
No, I didn't do the ribbon thing.
you didn't do the ribbon thing, so you just did the edge.
Let
Pressed
me
it
do
down and then brought
a
it back
double
up.
load. I think that's a little too, and you get used to how wet this has to be. And I think as Beth was saying, she lived in a very humid climate before this, and she came here, and of course it was dry. And if you have the furnace on, in Maine, winters are dry because you're inside with the furnace, there's no moisture in the air. And then you get to August and it's like 90% humidity. You have everything, so you learn how to adjust. So learn, practice each time. Again, if you have a test paper off to the side, you can test it for that moment in that time. I'm gonna double load the brush here. I'm gonna add a little green in the other side this time, I think. Just because almost all things, living things, plants and things go through a green stage. So if you're doing an apple, it has gone through a green stage, and somehow underneath subtly you want to add a little green into that apple. It makes it look better than just light and dark red. All right, so I have my double loaded brush, and I'm not going to do the twisty all the way thing. So I'm going to press it down,
You're going from
tip.
bottom to
press, and then lift.
top. Okay, I was going from top to bottom, instead of bottom to top on my pedal.
Yeah, this is, again, upside down, so it's... So you see, I didn't turn it all the way around. I just drag, press, drag up to the tip again. So you can get something like that.
Okay.
You get something that looks like that. I'll get something that looks like that.
Hey, I'm upside down, Linda, come on. It's just practice, just stay like,
Yeah.
like you're starting a fence.
Okay.
Drag it a little bit, then press it down, twist it again, and then lift. You get used to your tools, you get to understand and become partners with your tools. Now,
That's not bad.
it changes every, depending on what kind of paints, what hue of paint, what the pigment is, what your brush is, what your paper is, all of these variables are going to change
Dark in there.
how things look. So
But then I
that's,
don't know how you make it like
that one came out okay.
Yeah. Cause this is hard, this is hard to.
All right, that's good.
You getting thinner?
A lot of
You're
layering, you know.
picking a little bit.
Looking like
Try to
it's
do it
been
with
weird.
as few strokes as possible. It's partly your, see how I did all this like with just one brush, one stroke?
Okay.
That's
And this is the acrylic artist in me, can you tell?
yes, and shifting, actually, it's really good for our minds. Learning new things and shifting from one thing to, like when I went to Maine and they were still doing my
I'm
pastel,
excited on
but I
myself.
went to play again. It just, it had been 4 years since I'd thrown it.
Wow.
And it just helps that,
That's good.
those Oblique strategies, exactly, that was the word. Must have popped from your head. Oblique strategies, just mixing it up will help us create more things. Putting blocks in our way, like painting with your opposite hand, or getting some paint on your brush, closing your eyes and trying, just things that'll get us out of our comfort zone, increase our creativity.
I think I struggle with it because it's about control.
Yeah, release the control, let that inner, I was gonna say inner child, inner creative spirit
I
really.
don't know what the names of these colors are.
Sometimes I do that, if I get too tight, I will just sit back, do a couple yoga stretches, you know, or something, stretch out,
Makes sense.
breathe deeply, get centered, and then hope that the creative spirit will just pa-choom, hit me. Epiphany!
So on the sunflower, doing the little dots, I don't know, mine didn't come out so well, but.
It still looks a little wet, you know, I can tell because the paper's still blowing.
Mm-hmm, yeah, a little too wet.
And, oh, here for once, if you're going to the seedy area, in your sunflower, you need a different tool.
Okay. I use this one.
What I do is you paint with the wrong side of your brush.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Okay? So you need a rounded brush for this. I wonder if this one would work. Whoops. This one has like a hole in it. So I'm gonna try that. I want some fairly wet paint. What color do I need? Brown.
Brown.
I'm gonna get kind of a brown. And I'm just dipping the end of that brush into that. If this video comes out decent, I'll share it with you guys too. I don't know how if it's close enough to see. But I can just, hey, look at that. Oh yeah.
What'd you do?
Okay, I dipped this brush, which is hollow handle, and I just dipped it in paint.
Oh, I see, okay.
The first one, look at the first one, it had a nice little like
Hollow.
hole thing on it.
A straw.
Like, oh yes, a
A
straw.
straw would do it.
Nice.
So that, and then I can come in with the wrong side of the round-handled brush. Ba-ding, this one. See, I have to dip it in water. I don't know, I'm gonna use glue just 'cause. And then here, I can dot that inside of that. And I'm getting a cramp in my thumb. But I can just,
Oh.
for dots. Then you start looking around the house, as Roxanne just said, and you start finding other tools. You're like, that would work great as a tool. So that's a good way to do the seeds. Try to do it irregularly. Things in nature are not all the same, right? Your blades of grass are not all the same unless, even if you've had the lawn just cut, it's gonna be more interesting if it's a little irregular. Vary the color, vary the direction, mix it up a bit. All right. I am going to just come around, just see how you're playing. Please ask any questions. Any questions generally right now?
I'm running away from myself here.
I'm disappointed my plastic wrap didn't work. I'm gonna do another. Oh. Remember how we used the old credit card or something for a plastic card to make little rectangles to paint on? Another cool thing with this is, if you remember how we use the side of a sharp, flat brush to make fences? If you need some long, straight lines like in taller fences or a rock, or you know how rocks have those cracks in them? These things are great. You go and you kind of drag some paint onto the edge of it. God, I hope this works. And you can get some very thin lines. I'm doing this at an angle because, you know. But it's again, it's irregular. You can't totally control it, so you get some interesting things. Another thing you can do is even get some paint on it and drag it.
Oh, yeah.
This is fun. So you have these, you know, crackly lines, you have this kind of draggy line. More tools. I like to try to introduce tools that you can use around the house. Instead of edging it hard. This is just kind of slicing it, and this is kind of dragging it.
That kind of stuff would look good on like a line.
Like on H bar. So you'd start with your lighter color under and drag it.
Layered up.
Watercolor, you have to think negatively. You have to think going light to dark. Other things, you would put the shadowing dark area underneath and work with lights on top of that. But this is kind of fun. And I'll do that to me. Again, that's an oblique strategy by just flipping your thinking. I work so much in pastel or acrylic or something, you're working mostly medium and dark to lighter tones. In watercolor, you have to preserve those whites. You want to keep as much of that white paper shining through as possible.
So on this sunflower, it's got the
Okay. Let me, I just want to get
peachy
a
stuff.
new,
Sure.
How do I get pink eye? Have to make it like water?
Yeah. Definitely. You don't have to.
She told us what to use.
now if you're doing a number of things, like a peony and my first one didn't work out, if I did a couple on another sheet of paper and it turned out all right,
My
I
flower.
could kind of either cut that out and glue it onto another piece, so you're becoming almost a collage with watercolor.
I know.
I'm coming around.
Well, I did the end of the brush thing if I needed to make that a little lighter, a little too dark.
That's really good. Remember too, if you're at an easel, it's easy to do this. Stepping away is something harder to do in watercolor. Look how effective that flower is.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That is good.
Now, where's your light coming from? This is another consideration. If,
Looks like above.
look, if I tipped it this way,
Yeah, yeah.
so, I mean, we haven't talked about shading, that's what the drawing class is about. But try to keep an idea where your light's coming from. That area is going to be lighter. I can't do this very well. Say if you're doing the center of the sunflower or something, and your light's coming from this direction, this is gonna be your lightest area of that seeded area. And down here, it's gonna be darker because it's away from the sun, it's slightly rounded, and so this area is gonna be lighter, and this is gonna get darker as it goes this way. And the same with the petals, these petals are gonna be darker, these petals will be catching light and be a little lighter, generally speaking.
On this sunflower, it looks like the light is hitting at the bottom, they're
Yes.
lighter and they're darker.
This one, good point. This one, the flower looks to be tilted this way slightly. So this is gonna be darker, and these are catching, no, I can't do that. But if it makes sense, right? So you gotta think which way, and some of them will be like this, some will be like this, so they'll be very dark. Some will be straight on. So look at each one and handle each one a little differently.
Is there a brush trick to doing like peonies or roses?
That's what I'm trying to do with this, and I'm not being very successful today.
The
So I would start,
cellophane?
have a photo of
I don't know
some,
how you do all that.
Oh, I guess
Here,
it's
let me-
lifted, right?
Maybe, yeah, yeah.
see if I can do this.
I have this photo, but it's not very clear. The petals aren't very clear. It's not watercolor.
Cleaning brushes.
I know.
I have an
That's my
extra-
water up. I have all dirty water all the time.
I'm glad to hear that.
So I would look at this peony and I would say,
No, with my brushes too.
but I want to keep some light. So I'm thinking the petals, kind of larger areas of petals. I want white left in there. I want a little more water as I get toward the top. Maybe like that. And then kind of press that on there and leave it. And it should give me more of the, see, crinkly effect. See, this one had too much paint on it and it wasn't dry enough to work.
That's a pretty.
I'm just gonna.
There you go.
Mhm.
I like this petal thing.
You really like
Makes
it.
them look
You're
like
good.
real petals.
I like
you
your
know,
flower.
the shading.
Where's my peony?
I mean, they've been to Budapest,
Oh, this, yeah,
Madrid, Lisbon.
Oh, yeah, so they went south.
They've been everywhere, and you know, and then those are for long people.
We talked about value from white to black, but we haven't talked a lot about color, have we? And I can't find my color wheel. Here it is. So nice little color wheel, these are nice to have. But if you think about your primary colors, we talked a little bit about primary when we were mixing, right? Red, yellow, and blue. You mix any two of those, like red and yellow, you'll get a secondary color, orange. So your secondary colors are orange, green, and purple. They work together in your painting. If you just use, and if you don't mind, Jess was doing, she had a blue flower, beautiful little blue flowers, but it's all blue, it's all the same. And in nature, color is affected by color because we don't see color. Our eyes see light. And what happens is the light comes down, bounces off, the local color gets absorbed, and the other colors get bounced off. So that's why we're seeing it. So there's all color in all colors, because white light contains all colors. It's a conundrum, right? It's like kind of this mystery that's going on. So, anything that's growing, you might want to add a little green. Anything that's slightly in shadow, add a little blue. Okay, that'll help it. If you're doing something that's mostly blue, add a little bit of its complement. Did we talk complements? I think we did quickly. So if it's blue, your complement is going to be in your orange or yellow family. Just adding something from that family will make the blue more blue by comparison and also more interesting. In the orange and yellow family would be brown. It doesn't have to be yellow or orange. It can be a darker one of those, which is brown. And that's why these help. If you see, this is not totally accurate, but the yellow, as it's coming down, it becomes more brownish. Same with the orange, it becomes your burnt sienna. That's my little thing on color. Okay, now I'm going to look at some student work, some great ideas. Sorry the awkwardness of this video. I should have done a better job editing it. Here's some plastic wrap, and it looks like a Rocky Mountain path with trees. This is Wet and Wet. I added the little eyes and feet to make a little caterpillar. Remember to add extra colors in. This is nice. That little extra green helps a lot. This is wonderfully painted, but I see a little face. See the eyes and nose? Be careful of that. This is outlined. You could later on use black ink and it would look like stained glass. Here's some examples of the ends of a brush and also the sides of a credit card, some textures you can do with that. I love these leaves, the side loaded with the brown, and it just makes it a beautiful leaf, very natural. She accidentally dropped some water on this, blotted it, and look, a sun. Great accidents. Wonderful variation of techniques. I apologize for the awkward editing. And here's my UPC symbol.